I saw something on those roads today that absolutely made me scream in victory. It was an amazing moment I saw in the Philadelphia streets today. I was heading off to the studio, and my pathway to do that takes me up on Eakins Oval, which is a very, very big 4-lane roundabout. If you want to think about like a big traffic circle right in front of the Art Museum, the Philadelphia Museum of Art.
A 4-lane roundabout?
It's a 4-lane roundabout.
That's like that big one in Paris, that giant one. Okay, 4 lanes is a lot for a roundabout. Like you got to really be thinking. I who actually like roundabouts as a traffic system. That's a big roundabout. You really got to be thinking on that. Okay, keep going.
Well, you kind of do, but
also it's kind of idiot-proof. You get off when you get off. You keep going around if there's a problem.
We'll get to that in a minute because we're going to talk about one of those idiots that this is supposed to be proof. I'm waiting to get onto the roundabout, and I see this person that is on the far left and wants to be on the far right. I've got to guess it's somebody who's dropping somebody off at the Art Museum, and they're in the interior circle, and they've got to get all the way across to the far right to drop this person off, and cuts across 3 lanes of very fast-moving traffic who have to all of a sudden screech to a halt because this person is going to go cut all the way across. Now, here's the thing about what you're saying. If you do find yourself in the wrong lane on a roundabout, it's not bad news. It just means you go a roundabout one more time,
and you 30
work
seconds
your way
to your life. It's not that big a deal.
Yes,
yeah.
You just it's a circle. You're just going to come around.
Hey, guess what, champ? It's a circle. Just go around again. Yeah.
Guess what? Yeah, it's going to take another little bit of time out of your, but not this guy. He cuts across 3 lanes. Boom, boom, boom. Luckily, I was 1 or 2 back, but the truck, there was a big black Dodge pickup truck that he cut off. Actually took the time to swing over 1 more lane, and this guy threw what had to have been a large Starbucks coffee out the window. It hits this guy's driver's side window with this resounding splash. I can tell you one thing about this Dodge truck. He takes his coffee, cream, and sugar. I know that.
Oh, no.
Because it was this amazing caramel-colored splash. Gave him a little honk and then went on. And I sat there and I gotta tell you, my lizard brain was like, yes, you tell him, just go around the roundabout, you dummy. It could cause an accident doing stuff like that, but he made his comment with a large cream and sugar coffee, and I was here for it.
That's the most Philadelphia response to anything I've ever heard, is that, like, I'm going to waste $5 and my own enjoyment of my own coffee just to tell you how much I hate you in this moment.
Yes. You damn lucky it wasn't a battery if this was a Philadelphia sports fan.
Oh, my God.
Well, it was, I'll spend $5 to tell you how I feel. It's worth you knowing.
That's what I mean. It's like,
I
am so committed to letting you know what a jackass you are that I'm going to waste $5. I'm going to spend $5 and my own time throwing this coffee at you, which, by the way,
$5 well spent.
You say that as though that's not a huge possibility of causing a traffic accident, of like having this thing suddenly hit your window.
You're not wrong about that. You're not wrong about that.
Because Chicago has this this reputation as well. What is it about Philadelphia that breeds sort of a short temper? Is it the winters?
What are you saying? What do you mean by that? What are you trying to say? Are you trying to say something? Are you looking at me when you're saying that?
In our lifetime, and this is fun maybe for international friends to hear. In our lifetime, I think New York has actually sort of somewhat come down on its famous reputation for, hey, I'm walking here. That sort of like that short. And don't get me wrong, New Yorkers will still yell and cuss at you, but I feel like they've chilled out since the 80s a little bit. Like in our lifetime, in the last 30 years, they've chilled out, I think. Whereas Chicago and Philly still have a sort of like, I'm very willing to punch you right now if that's what needs to happen.
Well, my wife always explains it. The difference between the Midwest and Philadelphia is that Philadelphia is nice but not kind, and the Midwest is kind but not nice. In other words, if you're shivering on the street corner, a Philadelphian will give you the coat off their back, and as they're walking away, they'll tell you what an idiot you were for leaving the house without a sweater in the first place. They're kind, but they're not nice. Meanwhile, if you're in the Midwest and you're shivering on the corner, somebody will drive by in their car and they'll say, "Oh, look at that poor soul.
God bless him."
Yeah, God bless that poor soul. But they're not going to pull over and give him anything to like a blanket out of the trunk. But they are going to sit there and keep a good thought for that person. They're nice, but they're not kind.
A Philadelphian will see you without a coat on in a Philly winter, and they'll say, "Look at this jackass," and then they'll throw a hot coffee at him to heat him up. And on that note, I'm going to say hello, everybody, and welcome to Comic Lab, the show about making comics.
And warming your neighbors up and making a living from comics. I'm Brad Geiger, the editor of the Webcomics Handbook on Substack and the creator of Evil Inc.
And I'm his friend who's quick to cut him off, Dave Kellett, cartoonist of Drive and Sheldon. Sorry about that. And I'm the co-director of Stripped.
Last person to cut me off got a big tank
Got
of
a latte
Starbucks
in
right
the
in there. Yeah. And this week's Hour of Comics Advice is made possible by your support at patreon.com/comiclab. So Dave, let's talk comics.
Let's talk comics, my friend. It just occurred to me that whole story might have been you pulling a Fight Club, where you're like, some guy in a big truck threw a coffee. In the meantime, it was absolutely Brad Geiger that threw a coffee.
Here's how you know.
Again. He's like, some other guy, Tyler made me do it. I don't know what happened.
Here's how you know that it was not Brad Geiger. The day Brad Geiger spends $5 for a coffee is the day you know it's time to take him off to the home. I refuse. I can brew a much better cup of coffee, much more satisfying at a fraction of the price. You see me at a start. Yeah, I know. You will not see me do it. I'm way too cheap to ever go to Starbucks. And if I do get a coffee, not for nothing, it's going to be a mom and pop coffee shop, not freaking Starbucks. You know enough about Starbucks to know they're horrible. I'll go to a mom and pop place and support that family. You won't see me at no Starbucks.
You guys missed it mid sentence there, but I held up my Starbucks that I currently have for Brad to see, because I'm an economic chump that will waste $6 a year. And I've done the math, Brad. I actually have done the math on how much I spend on Starbucks a year, and it's in the thousands. It's not a small amount. And I can't not do. I love it. It's such good coffee. It makes. Listen. I make a good cup of coffee at home. I'm married into a Cuban family, and yet I still waste money. So anyway, this with the update of Brad Geiger letting us know that Philadelphia is still going to Philadelphia. You have one update. Let's just jump right into it, because you had one update that you wanted to bring onto the show, because I thought it was fascinating. We were talking about it right before we hit the record button, and it was about BlueSky.
I've been doing some A/B testing on BlueSky, but ever since you've kind of convinced me to give BlueSky another look, I'm like, nah, okay, because I was really kind of checking in and checking out and not paying too much attention to it. But you were like, nah, give this another look. There's really something happening here. So I've been just, and by A/B testing, don't make it let you think it's any more fancy than what it was. I just post the same thing on Twitter and the same thing on BlueSky at the same time, and keep track of the difference in engagement. Okay. And part of this, I'm going to be hamstrung by the fact that BlueSky still doesn't deliver great engagement metrics, not great analytics yet. Listen, they just got video. So I'm happy we got that far with BlueSky. But even without the granular analytics, the difference is startling. I just posted something this morning, which was a great example. I posted, I'll just read it word for word. Life is too short to draw backgrounds in every freaking panel. Once you've established the setting, give yourself the freedom to focus on the foreground, including background elements as needed to understand the scene. That's it.
Which, by the way, is great cartooning 101 advice.
Oh, yeah.
And you can see that from a through line from Marvel to Archie to comic strips. Everybody uses that technique. Yep, that's great.
Yes. And you can tell sometimes it's hard to let go of that, but it's for your best interest.
It also is for the best interest of the reader. It speeds cognitive flow in terms of understanding the comic, you know?
Yes. No, you're right about that. So I posted that at 9:24. Right now it is just going on noon. So what is that? 2.5 hours or so, right?
Liberal arts math.
So here's the engagement I'm getting on Twitter. As of this time right now, I've got 4 likes, 1 retweet, and 1 comment. Okay.
Can I tell you what this is what that reaction sounds like out loud, okay?
Yeah.
Okay, keep going.
Yeah. Here's Blue Sky. 51 likes, 10 retweets, and 2 comments. Oh, it's got to be more than 2 comments. Nope, there's just 2 comments.
But still, 51.
10 retweets.
Yeah.
Including 8 reposts, 2 quote posts to make that 10, 2 direct comments, but 51 likes driving that. If I don't have how many people viewed this, which would have been helpful to really do a 1-to-1 comparison. And by the way, still going strong. I just updated and I've gotten more likes in the time that I've been talking here. On Twitter, this thing is dead. It's getting no more engagement. It's getting no more views. It's dead in the water.
Yeah.
Blue Sky is really delivering some impressive engagement right now. And that's kind of it's nice to see after as long as we've gone with having a social media. Is Blue Sky the answer? Is Blue Sky the big shining light that we've been hoping for? I don't know. I don't think so. But it is nice to finally get a post with some engagement again after what's it been, 18 months or so of nothing.
So I've got a couple things I want to say. First of all, I love this A/B testing. Second of all, I wholeheartedly agree with you that I immediately feel what I felt on the early years of Twitter. It was like, oh, there's a reason why I fell in love with Twitter. It's because you got a heartbeat, and now Blue Sky has a heartbeat. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And it also just reinforces how much Twitter is all just state-sponsored bots and weird nationalists now. That you're like, oh, this is what it's like to have normal, nice people reading and commenting on your work. I cannot emphasize enough how much I'm enjoying Blue Sky, literally enjoying it, not just begrudgingly using it. I'm using it like I did early Twitter. I'm talking to friends. I'm chatting with them. I'm seeing posts that are related because I can see what friends are talking to friends. I'm using it as a user, not just as a cartoonist sharing my work. And so unlike Brad, when Brad said, is Blue Sky the answer? I'm actually going to draw a line in the sand. I'm going to predict it. I think Blue Sky has won the new social media wars. I think 2 years from now, Blue Sky is going to be north of 50 million people. I really do. And I feel like it will have been the new Twitter. And I think one of the reasons why Twitter capitulated to the Brazilian government is because a couple million Brazilians in a hot minute jumped from Twitter over to Blue Sky when they got shut down, which was a stupid move that they allowed themselves into that place.
Dumb. So dumb.
One of the classic rules of business is when you have a customer captured, you don't let them go somewhere else, because as soon as they go somewhere else, a huge percentage of them will stay somewhere else. You know what I mean?
Right.
So what a dumb shit decision. But anyway, just a long line of dumb shit decisions around Twitter. But anyway, I really will draw a line in the sand. I genuinely think, now granted, it's going to have its own enshittification process. 5 to 6 years from now, we're all going to hate Blue Sky, and we're going to be like, oh, I'm so sad that Peter Thiel bought out Blue Sky. But for now, it seems to be delivering results in a kind community, so far, where it's not overrun by bots and terrible people. And I really enjoy it. I think the results are great.
Yep, I'm seeing wonderful results, and also it's like when something like this happens, you get a chance to correct maybe some of the mistakes you made before.
Yes.
Like one thing I'm doing that I never did on Twitter, and I'm seeing great results, is if somebody likes something that I post or engages in any way, that's an instant follow. Bing, follow. I just go through in the morning, follow, right? Because social media is social. It's something I never really did so much on Twitter. And now it's way too late. It doesn't matter. But I have grown my Blue Sky at this point in the last 2 weeks or so by about 100 followers, just because when you follow them, that puts you on their radar and they follow back. Am I necessarily going through and reading everything that these people are posting? No. If they put something that comes up on my screen and I like it, I'll like it, maybe reshare it. But in Twitter, I was trying to kind of curate my feed. Like, oh no, only certain people get into the Brad Geiger feed. Well, that was kind of a dumb way to do it, right? Blue Sky, I'm like, hey, if you're engaging with me, I'm engaging with you. Social media is social.
I'm easy like a Sunday morning.
Yes. And social media is social, and I'm going to be social. And I'm going to tell you, this is the time to get your head on straight with Blue Sky, in that it is delivering right now. And it's time to maybe correct some of the mistakes that you feel you might have made early in social media. Because again, I don't know whether I sign off on Blue Sky is the one.
It is.
I do like, I got to write this down that you made a really big prediction today, because we got to come around and circle around back to this on our first show of 2025. I'm going to
put it in my Apple's iCal 2 years from now, 50 million users on Blue Sky. I'm going to put it in my iCal that on this date I predicted it, and 2 years from now it's going to be 50 million people. I guarantee it. I can feel it in my bones, and I'll tell you why. It's when you walk into a certain party and you're like, oh, everybody who's anybody is here at this party. This is a hopping party. Yeah. I go to Blue Sky and I'm like, oh shit, every creator that I love is on Blue Sky, and they're actively using it. They're not just like there and like, no, I don't know if I like this thing, which is exactly what happened on Threads. But on Blue Sky, people are actively using it. In fact, even some cartoonists that I haven't seen on Threads or Twitter or on whatever the previous Mastodon versions. This one clearly just has a spark of for a lot of creators, and they're taking to it. So this is one of those rare predictions where Dave Kellett's gonna put himself on the line. I'm gonna say Blue Sky is it. This is where people are going. I really do feel it.
You mentioned Mastodon. Are you sure it's not? Are we drawing the? Are we counting Mastodon out too soon? There's still time. Don't you think there's still time for Mastodon to come and make a big push and become the dominant social media? Don't you think there's time?
I know you're setting me up so we could be sarcastic, but no. Listen, because it's sort of the federated universe, it still will be fine. It'll play a part, as will Blue Sky in that federated universe. I just think Blue Sky made kind of 5 to 10 way better key decisions early on in terms of how they launched, the way they will launch, the way they would welcome new people on, the difficulty with which someone could jump onto a server or any server. Or I still wish that the naming system in Blue Sky was simple, like it was on Twitter or Threads. And here's what I mean. Because every name is not just, B Geiger at B Geiger or Geiger or Kellett or whatever. It's like Dave Kellett at Blue Sky at Happy Ice Cream at, you're like, all right, what's with this super long? And I get it that it's part of the federated universe, so it needs more specificity in the naming, but I just don't love it as much. But anyway, all that being said, I'm gonna put a prediction on the line. 2 years from now, 50 million users, and Blue Sky is it.
Oh, I love it. Well, having said that, let's go to our first question from our Patreon backers. Yes. This one coming in from Cassidy, who says, I was curious about your thoughts on reader input as seen in Homestuck and the MS Paint comics in general. From what I remember, when Homestuck was popular, the ability to have some illusion of influence over the story drove a lot of interest in the beginning. Although, if memory was right, the creator basically could choose whatever they wanted to do due to the volume of entries at some point and eventually stop taking suggestions. But more recently, I know of at least one audio drama podcast whose story has been shaped by specific polls posted for Patreon subscribers to vote on. I think this sounds interesting, within reason. And as someone who likes collaborative storytelling and seat-of-the-pants creativity, I was curious about your thoughts on this topic. So, Dave, allowing your readers, whether it's through polls or comments or any other interaction, allowing your readers to guide the storytelling, thumbs up, thumbs down, what's the verdict?
I'm not a huge fan, and I'll tell you why, but let me start off by saying there are types of performative art that are great for call and response. Improv, you absolutely want audience feedback or input on the prompt for a scene, right? You're like, give me one, a type of animal, a rhino. Okay, thanks. We got rhino. Give me a mood. Despondent. Okay, it's a despondent rhino and a job. A mailman. Okay, the rhino is a despondent mailman, and he's, okay. So it's fun to have. That's a very specific art form where call and response or reader input is fun. The same, to a lesser extent, is also true with stand-up. But when you go to see a play, what you want is the unique, distinctive voice of the playwright, and to a degree, the actors coming through on their performances, coming through to tell you a story. You want to have the guiding hand of the author coming out, right? That's not to say that one art form is better than the other. I'm just saying that certain art forms do better by having an artist-heavy approach, and some do better by having an audience participation approach. All of which is leading me to say there are comics that do well in sort of a breaking the fourth wall, audience participation kind of thing. It tends to be best with humor and short form where there's no story involved. That's why it might have worked for certain segments when Strong Bad is answering reader emails. But here's the dirty little secret that maybe even the what were they, the Brothers Chap? What was their name? The guys that did Homestar?
That I don't remember.
It doesn't matter. But here's the thing about Strong Bad that I can tell you as an artist. I bet you, Brad, a lot of those reader questions might have been written or heavily edited by the creators to make it more artful, to make the punch bigger, to get them the punchline. Or even if it wasn't rewritten, out of 100, they selected the one that they knew they could build a joke off of, in the sense that...
Of course. So
all of which to say is, could it be used? Yeah, but from an art standpoint, there's a real value in people don't just want to hear a opinion or a story. They want to hear your story if you're doing it right, or your take on your characters. They don't necessarily want to see what Bob from Topeka wants from the story. You know what I mean? Right. They want to know what Brad Geiger is going to tell them about the story in Evil Inc. or something. Yeah. And then the second thing I will say to this is one of the reasons why I'm hesitant is because when you take audience input, or you take, like, say, a poll response or an email as a prompt, you don't 100% know the genesis of that idea. Like, you and the reader thinks the idea is from the reader, but the reader might have been subconsciously holding on to that idea because they saw it from The Simpsons 10 years earlier, and they just forgot that it was from The Simpsons, And so I find incredible creative and economic value in knowing that all the ideas and all the mistakes in my comics are mine. If I made a mistake, it's my mistake. I can't then pass it off to a reader. And all the ideas are mine. I can trace them to my own creativity. But and if I made a mistake on that, if somehow a Simpsons idea has been sitting latent in the back of my head, that's my mistake, and I've got to train myself to not make that again. Right. So all of which to say, both from a format standpoint and a ownership of IP standpoint, I don't 100% love it, but now I've been talking too long. Brad, what do you think about this idea?
I listen, this is kind of a different strokes for different folks type of thing.
Okay.
If it's something you want to do, I think that's fine. I would not ever feel right about doing it for myself. If I were to do something like this. And why? Can
I prompt you on that? Why would you not feel right?
Because I would feel like it was either a crutch, a gimmick, or a cop-out. It's for me, for my creative process, I would think it was a crutch, a gimmick, or a cop-out. And I don't like any of those things. I don't like the gimmicky nature of it. I don't like the fact that I am passing off my creativity on someone else and using it as a crutch or a cop-out, right? If it turns out to be a bad idea, I can just say, well, hey, that's what the poll said I should do, and I'm just following the poll. That's a cop-out, right? You need to have skin in the game as a creator, in my opinion. And that means you, like Dave just said, you take ownership of it. Yeah. Here's the other part of this that really bugs me. For my way of thinking, this always leads to the most bland, vanilla, uncreative answers to creative questions. And I'll show you why I think I'm right. Take a look at any company's logo, any company that's been around for 10 or 20 years, and take a look at their logo design over the years. Take a look at Google's logo. what it was 10 years ago and what it is now. Take a look at the eBay logo. Take a look at any number of logos. Today, most of the logos, they do this big redesign when they, you know, they're like, well, we're doing a redesign. And it's basically 80-point Arial straight in a straight line, right? And Google had a really interesting logo, but today Google's logo is like 80-point Arial. eBay had an amazing logo. It's eBay, EBAY.
Even Yahoo has slowly been vanilla-ized. If you look at the, like the font kerning and letting, exactly.
All of them, it just becomes, so you look at that and you go, oh, that's that. You know, why is that? I'll tell you why that is. Because when the people at each one of these organizations was in their nascent period, and they were, oh, we need a logo. You know, they're in their garage as a startup. We need a logo, and it was a small number of people making that decision, and very often it was an exciting, creative decision because those people building the company were excited about what they were doing. And so you see all of these logos are the Pepsi logo has gotten more and more boring over time. The classic Pepsi logo was a font that they commissioned to be built for Pepsi. That's back when they were excited and creative. And now what happens is that if Google, and I'm picking on Google, but it could be anybody, if they want to do a logo redesign, it's not just a few people making that decision. It's a whole lot of people making that decision, and everybody's putting their input in, and everybody's, by the way, it's that when we worked in newspapers, we used to say every dog has to piss on the tree. If I don't make some kind of comment on this that says, "Oh, I wouldn't do that. I would do it the other way." If I don't do that, then maybe they don't need me at my job, and then I'm going to be eliminated, right? So I've got to make a comment, and this, as a result of too many people making the decision, this becomes the most vanilla, uninteresting, boring thing you've ever seen.
Right.
I think the same thing applies to storytelling. I think too many cooks spoil the plot. Okay. I think you need to take ownership of what you're doing.
Yeah.
And that means keeping the readers out of the writing process.
Yeah. I noticed you also went with plot, as did I, because I do think there's a part of me, much like improv or stand-up, that sees that this could work for very short-form humor stuff. You know what I mean? Like, hey, we're all just having fun here. We're all just throwing out, like, LOL, that's so random kind of jokes
like
and
the
ideas.
New Yorker caption contest.
Yeah, New Yorker, exactly. New Yorker caption contest is the perfect example of where it might work. And sometimes where best idea wins. So in all the better for it. But when it comes to plot and character and story and arcing storylines, that's where you want a singular voice, an author, an auteur coming in and saying, this is where the story's going. In part because, Brad, don't you think audiences also don't necessarily know what they want? Right. What they, you know what I mean? Like, if you ask a Star Wars fan what they want, they're like, more lightsabers, more explosions, blah, 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 which ends up being kind of crappy Star Wars stories, right? Like, a truly unique story comes from a singular standpoint, saying, this is the story that I'm going to tell, and all the better for it. Whereas, if much like Brad said, when you get a certain established fan base like Avengers or like a Star Wars or like, name the established fan base, you tend to start getting more vanilla stories because they start doing story by committee, or they start getting a bunch of notes or audience testing rather than letting auteurism drive the storyline. Don't you think that's true?
I think I'll take it one step further. I think what readers want is often not what the story needs, because readers want what they've seen before and they know that they liked. Your job as an author is to give them something they've never seen before that they love. Right. And all your readers can say, it's like that old quote that gets attributed to Henry Ford. If we would have listened to our customers, they would have said they wanted faster horses. Right. Your readers are the same way. I'll give you a great example. Game of Thrones, which is a huge behemoth in terms of pop culture.
Until season 8.
What's that?
I said until season 8, but yes, keep going.
Until season 8.
Until they ran out of pre-written story. Yeah, keep going.
Yeah. But Game of Thrones was a huge pop culture behemoth.
Yeah.
Now, if you would have asked the readers if they wanted key characters to die at certain points during that storyline, they would have all said, no, don't kill him. I like him. Don't kill her. She's great. But the fact that Game of Thrones was willing to kill any character at any time, no matter how much popular they were, how great of a character they were, made you sit up and pay attention to every second. You did not take your eyes off the screen when Game of Thrones was on, because it was compelling. Anybody could buy it at any time. That was compelling storytelling. But if they would have listened to the readers, they would have never gotten that. But the other famous writing analogy is you got to kill your darlings, right? We've all heard that 100 different times in 100 different shows. Kill your darlings. No reader ever wants their darlings killed.
Right.
But it's imperative that as a writer that we are able to make that decision, not just to make it as a knee-jerk decision, but to know when is the right time. And you get none of that listening to polls. So yeah, I'll come around to what you're saying. I could see it working in certain instances. And quite frankly, if it's what you want to do, then do it. But for the way I approach creativity, I'd never, ever feel comfortable with it.
Yeah. And so, listen, can you do it? Sure. Do we recommend that you try it? If it's something you want to do, go for it. But ultimately, I think what Brad and I are trying to say is that a little bit, it feels like you might be going for an emotional cop-out of like, well, if we're all doing this, then it's failure is not really mine to own. I guess the concept just didn't work. Yeah. Whereas if you put yourself on the line and sit down and write the characters and stories and jokes that you want, it's yours to own and control, but also the failure will be yours. And that's a little scary. So I a little bit feel like that might be what's happening here. I mean, I don't want to put too much mustard on it, but I a little bit feel like that might be what's happening here.
Yeah, I'll put a button on it. I don't think you get to be a better writer by following polls.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
You know what I mean? It's one thing, like every now and again on my Patreon, I'll do a poll for a commission. Hey, which character do we want to see in a commission? And then I'll do a commission based on that poll. And that's a really good interactive thing to do with your readers. But that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about letting the readers into your creative writing process. And I don't think you get to be a better writer by doing that.
And I'll go perhaps one step further. Brad always very rightly says, listen to your readers, not to your reader. The idea being like you listen to them in mass, you listen to them as a group, you listen to feedback that you get repeatedly and strongly and overwhelmingly versus the one squeaky wheel who's like, I don't like this, I don't like that.
Yeah.
But I will also say, I think even Brad will admit this, that instead of listening to your readers or your reader, ultimately listen to yourself. You have to learn your own interior editor, your own interior aesthetic, to learn to trust the story that you want to tell, the arcs that you want to tell, the character development that you want to tell.
Yeah. I think the great Willie Nelson probably said it best when he said, Mama, don't let your readers grow up to be writers.
And on that note, I just want to apologize to Willie Nelson and everyone currently stoned on his travel bus, because that was probably the worst Willie Nelson. That was kind of a 1950s lounge act, Willie Nelson. It was like, mamas, don't let your babies grow up to be. You got to, first of all, you got to do the tremolo, like grab your Adam's apple and do this.
Yeah.
Mama, don't let your baby grow up to be a cowboy. You got to. I don't know what I'm doing.
Hey, if you're listening while you work, take a minute to stand and stretch.
And while you're doing that, we're going to tell you why you should join us on Patreon.
When you do, you're going to get hours and hours of podcasts that we recorded just for backers.
And exclusive Patreon posts that go even deeper on Comic Lab topics.
And access to our exclusive Discord server, which is a thriving community of professional cartoonists.
So you can support the show you love and get tons of actionable resources for your own cartooning.
And listen, if you can't swing a pledge this month, we get it. No worries.
Yeah, listen, you can still support the show by rating us wherever you get your podcasts.
Just leave a 5-star review and a few kind words.
That, along with mentions on social media, is incredibly helpful.
Now, everybody, let's talk comics.
All right, Brad. Well, I got our next question coming in over from patreon.com/comiclab. And this one goes, hey, Brad and Dave, what tips do you have for non-social media advertising? I have found much more success through word of mouth or contact with local businesses and events. Is social media really worth it anymore? Instead of hours creating content, should I put in hours of community outreach and events? What do you think, Brad? Personal outreach versus social media outreach?
Yeah, I think this is a dangerous road to go down. I think I know what's happening, and it's not unconnected to our opening topic about blue sky. I think there's a reason that this person feels that way. I don't know that I would, if I was doing it for me, I don't know that I would be comfortable doing this in my business. And I'll tell you why. Because even living in a big city like Philadelphia, there is a limit to the scalability of what we're talking about here. I can only, if I'm limiting myself to personal outreach in my immediate area or places that I can easily travel to, and let's say I do what this question asker is talking about, just curtailing social media entirely and focusing on personal outreach. There is a hard limit to the scale that I can achieve when I do that. And it's not very effective. It's not very efficient. Mm-hmm. And the reason that I'm on social media is to spread my work as far as I can in an effort to get readers, right? I want to put that message out to 10,000 people. So 1,000 people might pay attention, so that 100 people might read it, so that 50 people might read it a second time, so that 5 people might remember me and either become a subscriber on Substack or a Patreon backer or something like that. Mm-hmm. That's the social media approach. And there's only so far I can go when I'm doing personal outreach. Even if I'm not talking about me at a booth at a flea market, for example, which might be part of, but if I'm hanging a flyer at a comic shop and stuff like that, even those things have a hard limit on their scalability that for my business, I would not be comfortable with. At all. Like, I wouldn't want this. However, I can totally understand where this person mentally is coming from, but this is dangerous. I think this is a false positive that you're getting, because where we just got done talking about how Twitter, you send something out and it only got a certain amount of engagement. Mm-hmm. And you hear creative people all the time saying, I feel like I'm shouting into the void. Right? That sentence that you hear all the time. I feel like I'm shouting into the void. And what happens, this person goes to, let's say, a small market, opens up a table and gets feedback from actual people that they can see.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And they get people giving them compliments, or maybe at the best, even a comment, some kind of validation that you actually are here and exist as a person. And it's easy to think that that is more powerful than what you're doing on social media, because it feels more powerful. Mm-hmm. But at the same point, it's just one person, or it's just a small number of people. And the hard limit on the scalability of that is really going to, if I were to implement it in my business, I would feel like it would hurt me in the long run. So I would not accept that for me. If somebody was saying, Brad, you need to stop social media, or even curtail social media a little bit and focus on personal appearances and places you can be. Also, let's not forget, even if we're talking about going so much as just putting a flyer up in a comic shop, that means in many cases, at least showing up into the comic shop and talking to the person, asking for permission to hang the flyer in the window, stuff like that. All of those minutes, all of those hours, all of those days in accumulated sense is time I'm not spending in the studio doing comics, right? Social media, I can kind of do send, and I can get that done relatively quickly. A personal appearance is something that takes a lot more hours out of my studio time, and that's a danger for me. So I would not feel comfortable doing this, Dave. Is this something that you would attempt?
No, I mean, I first of all, I want to co-sign everything that Brad said, because I think the psychological framing that Brad has given this is probably accurate, in that you have people physically in front of you giving you feedback. The feels are there. Like you're like, oh, this is lovely. People are giving me comments and critiques and feedback on my work. And I'm building relationships perhaps with some of these local folks. And isn't that lovely? But to tie it in a super broad way, let me talk about the printing press for a minute. Because if you were a storyteller before the printing press, you usually had to go town to town, set up a little stage, get out your lyre, perhaps sing a little song, do a little dance, tell your tale, move on to the next town, right? You're at best reaching 100, 150 people. You fire up those first printing presses, suddenly you're reaching 1,000, 10,000, 100,000 people with the same story, perfectly crafted in a way that gave you the time to really nail it. Put it on a printing press, send it across all the countries and nation states around you, right?
Yes.
The internet is the extension of that exact same scenario. Is that, yes, you can go to your local flea market, you can go to your community Rotarian fair, whatever it is, and meet 50 people, 150 people, 250 people on a bad day on social media. Brad's worst post can do that with 5 seconds of effort, right?
Yeah, you're right about that.
And so, and if he's doing his job right, everyone is within seconds away from a link to be able to buy a book or that thing that he's got ready and waiting for them, right? And so, as Brad always says, any reach is useless unless there's a link that they can click to back or click to buy or click to support or any of those things. So, social media has that right in readiness. I think I'm also, if I can kind of switch topics here, the thing that has me a little concerned about this question is the last part of your question, where you say, instead of hours creating content, should I put in hours of community outreach and events? And it's the phrasing of hours creating content, because to me, creating my comics is the core part of who I am and who I want to be and what I want to be doing with my days. So far from being a waste of time, that's the whole point of everything else that I do, is to be able to support me having enough time to create comics in the week, you know?
Let me give you a quick little readjustment there. I think what they're saying is, instead of hours creating social media content.
Yeah, but social media content.
Okay, like I would guess, reading in between the lines, I'm going to guess that this person might be doing something that's a little bit more high impact than what you and I would suggest. Like, for example, they might be taking their comic and converting it into a video for TikTok. Right.
Yeah.
Or like, in other words, instead of just posting the image and tell them why it's good, or what I am now calling swig, say why it's good. Instead of doing that, swig
we
is
now
so
have
good.
Swig, everybody! Congratulations to all of us. Swig is our new one. I'm going to pull up alongside Swig and throw a coffee at it. That's how I feel about Swig.
No, but I think they're saying that they're spending a lot of time creating their social media content.
Okay, I guess, but. To me, the core creating our social media content is creating our comics, which is the core aspect of what we want to do. Unless this question asker is really looking for illustration for hire jobs, in which case going at community outreach, going to events, meeting local businesses. If that's what you're trying to do, then yes, I guess that's the better way to go. But if you're trying to be a cartoonist that makes comics, it's not extra work. It's not work that's only being wasted on social media. You're collecting it on your website. You're collecting it on your mailing list. You're ultimately collecting it to put into a book to sell it. So to me, none of that is wasted. It's the core aspect of what we do. Yeah. And again, Brad might be right. I might be just misreading that in terms of all the extra effort. Maybe what they meant to say is the extra effort around posting to social media.
Right.
But if we're being honest, it's not that much extra effort to post on social media, especially once you limit your platforms.
It shouldn't be that much extra effort. And that all comes down to discipline and self-control. I mean, listen, we all know it's very easy to spend hours scrolling and tell ourselves, well, I'm being a social media manager. No, you're just scrolling TikTok. You're not doing shit. No, I'm being a manager. I've really found, and I've been talking about this for the last couple of shows, I found a lot of value out of taking those apps off of my phone.
Yep.
I'll sit down and make a bunch of posts or prepare a bunch of posts. Send those out. If I can schedule like I can on Twitter, I'll schedule them. Other than that, I'll literally just open up a bunch of tabs and go and prep a bunch of posts like on Blue Sky. And then when I'm walking through the studio at different times, I'll just hit send. And then I won't pay a whole lot of attention to it. Right? Because again, those days of you got to respond really quick to juice the algorithm, I think those days are kind of gone, even on Blue Sky. Yeah. Although I have been tuning in, I got to admit, a little bit more on Blue Sky. But overall, I got to tell you, the time that you're spending on social media, you can control that.
Absolutely.
It takes self-control and discipline. But if you're spending a lot of time on social media and you're not getting great results out of it, it's not that you should start showing up in-person events. I think the quicker answer, the Occam's razor, is that you should be spending less time on social media.
Yeah. Because that's not, to echo Brad's thought, that's not a failure of wasting creator time on social media. That's wasting consumer time on social media, which is different. That's just as scrolling, which is what the world is wasting time on. And so I co-sign that. But also having been to a billion flea markets and Comic Cons over the years and to set up a table and schlep all the stuff and set up the booth, all that takes forever. That's not an easy. Local events are not easy. That's physically, it's a big waste of a day, and then you're tired when you get home. It is. There's a reason why Brad has limited Comic Cons 99.9% out of his life. It's because they are largely a waste of time, considering what he can get done online, reaching more people, selling more books to people, without ever lifting a finger of books into a truck. It's just Brad clicking a button,
Yeah. The main thing that bothers me is scalability. I think you hit a hard limit.
And that's why I use the metaphor of the printing press, because the printing press immediately made life way more scalable, and the internet even more so to that. Like, I can reach. In what world in 1950 could I have reached readers for a virtually costless process? Just the same in Australia as I can in the UK and in Canada and Brazil and in Southwest Texas. I mean, the internet is amazing in terms of the near frictionless and costless aspect of being able to share my work around the world and find my tribe from very different demographics and psychographics and geographics that find Brad Geiger or find Dave Kellett or find your work, and they are subscribing into that tribe,
Yeah, and it's clickable, which means that in that moment they can become a Patreon backer, they can become a customer, they can be a subscriber. It's just way better. So speaking of Patreon backers and being a subscriber, we've been getting this question a lot. As a matter of fact, I just did a podcast interview where the host kind of took me to task because I wasn't using Substack as a monetization vehicle. And he's like, why is that? And we talked about it for a little while. And it's also a question that has come up in our Discord and in the questions. So it's high time we address this. So this question that's going to frame the topic comes in from Andy, who says, Patreon versus Substack. They're both solid platforms. So how do I evaluate which is better to monetize my comic? I suspect using both is not optimal, but I'm open to other opinions. So let's take this on once and for all. Patreon versus Substack. 2 goes into the ring. Maybe only 1 comes out. What's it going to be, Dave Kellett?
This is Mad Max Thunderdome. 2 platforms enter, 1 platform leaves. All right, so let's do brass tacks. As much as I just got done saying, like, Blue Sky is it. Blue Sky is where people are going to be 2 years from now. It's going to be 50 million users. Right now, Blue Sky is 10 million users. So the brass tacks of Blue Sky is it ain't yet where it's at. Like, it's got the potential. Dave Kellett personally sees it as a nascent one that's going to grow into huge success. but it ain't there yet. And I think the same is kind of true with Substack. Brad, who has been the proponent of Substack, sees the potential there, sees that aspects of it are working, but he's not putting his whole career on there. You could tell just by what Brad is doing that he is staying full force on Patreon. I am staying full force on Patreon because it is the established network that is working for us and has been working for us and has a track record of working for us. And has yet to really bork it up, like in the way that Twitter did. Yeah. Like Kickstarter is still a performer. Patreon's still a performer. Yeah. You don't mess with a performer that has an established user base and frankly stored credit cards. So yes. I'm still a proponent that while Brad is an advocate that Substack has the spark, that he sees growth and potential and things that are in place that will work for him now and in the future, the user base and the audience expectation of what Substack is and could be is not yet where Patreon is. I will say wholeheartedly, Patreon is where you want to go.
Yeah, I agree with just about everything you're saying there in terms of, I think Patreon is the clear winner in terms of monetization. And you don't see me doing a lot of monetization on Substack. No. In fact, what I'm mainly using Substack for is audience building, audience growth. There's a lot of SEO options there that I like. There's a lot of pre-made promotional images and stuff like that. The ability to make a little promotional video with the touch of a button. There's something that we just kind of got done talking about. This person from the previous question is spending a lot of time on social media. You can hit a button and create a very nice promotional video for your comic with a voiceover and everything else. And I like it for all of those things. But you don't see me doing a lot of monetization at all. In fact, I'm not offering any exclusive content on my Evil Inc. Substack. And the Webcomics Handbook is pretty much mirroring webcomics.com content. That's about the most monetization that I'm doing. Yep. Is breaking my own rule in splitting those streams a little bit, partially, if I'm being honest, so that I could speak a little bit more intelligently about it on the show. So I wasn't talking about theoretical, I could have some skin in the game. Right. But and also because webcomics.com is a secondary thing to, it's a secondary income source. The prime income source, you'll notice, I haven't touched because it's working really well, and there is no reason to mess with that. And I really don't like overall this idea of saying, well, you of having multiple monetization platforms in play, right? You see people sometimes, say you can put a pledge on Patreon, or you can join me on Substack. You can subscribe on Substack, or you can do this other Patreon clone.
Or join me on Subscribestar, or buy me a coffee on Ko-fi or whatever that thing is. Yeah,
God. Yeah, and then
it just sounds like the saddest begging, frankly, is what it ends up sounding like.
It sounds sad, and also you're giving your person too many options. Yeah. And we know from experience, too many options causes paralysis. Yes, if you say, hey, join us on Patreon, here's a link. And also, what do we say on the show all the time? Your person's got to hear that message about 7 times before it sinks in. If your message is changing, or you're giving them too many details in that message, right? I'm a proponent of consistent messaging down to, I'll use the same sentences. I'll use the same sentence structure for the most part, except for very few changes. I want as much repetition as I can get, because I know that this person I'm speaking to has things other than Brad Geiger going on in their life. And I need that repetition to sink in. And that means keeping that same structure, those same wordings over and over and over again, so it starts to sink into their head. I don't think you can do that as well with so many different payment structures out there. So for me, it's still Patreon for monetization, Substack for audience building and growth, and building that funnel appropriately, pointing people in certain directions so that you can lead them eventually to one of your monetization endpoints, whether it's Patreon or Kickstarter or selling a book on your online store. That's how I've got it set up right now. Right? Could that change in the future? Possibly, but right now, I think the clear winner is Patreon for monetization, Substack for growth.
Yeah, for me, the short form of this is you need to be able to discern potential from performance. Potential is Brad and I seeing, hey, Substack, there's a real spark here, or BlueSky, there's a real spark here, or hey, the audiences really seem to get a lot, I push certain levers and things seem to happen. This platform has potential. But performance is where the rubber hits the road. Kickstarter gets the credit card in. Patreon gets the credit card in. They have the user base. They have the established community of trust. And so Brad and I are saying, in Brad's case, Substack seems to have the potential to be a performer down the line. I'm saying BlueSky seems to have the potential to be a performer down the line. But we're not saying they actually perform right now. They don't necessarily bring in. So this is one of those things where you keep your head on a swivel, because might Patreon shit the bed 3 years from now? Absolutely. And might Substack take its place? Absolutely. But for right now, they have not yet alienated their readers and audiences and communities and creators and artists. So Kickstarter and Patreon, I think, are still the 800-pound gorillas when it comes to distributed fundraising for either a project or a long-term project.
Absolutely. Dave, we've got time for one more, and I think we can sneak it in here before the end of the show. And this is kind of an important one that I've been wanting us to address for a little while. This person is asking for business advice.
Okay.
They say, hello, comics uncles. I realized that if I want to be serious about selling comics online, I have to start a business. I realize legalities differ by region, but can you please explain more about the business setup side? Did you write a business plan or immediately start as an LLC? So let's give this person some business advice for somebody who's just starting out.
Okay. So I'm going to, first of all, just a reminder for everybody, Brad and I are coming at this from an American standpoint, but we're in very different states. Philadelphia has different business laws than California, where I live. Or sorry, Pennsylvania has different business laws than California, where I live. And we both have different cities. So Philadelphia and Los Angeles have very different tax bases and tax approaches to things. But all that being said, the short form is, if you are just getting started, no, you do not have to start any form of business. You do not have to incorporate. You do not have to form any form of business entity that is separate from yourself. The truth is, you kind of have to start finding out if there's a there before you put all the business structures in place. Certainly, from a liability standpoint and from a true business standpoint, would the wise thing be to have all those corporate things in place? Yes, but you're not going to spend the $1,000 to $2,000 to incorporate, get the legal things drawn up, get the separate bank accounts, because you don't know if they're making any money yet. The obvious human structure is to just start as like, hey, I'm Dave Kellett. I'm selling my first Sheldon comic book. This is me going back to 2007. I'm selling my first, and it's just me. And maybe I had filed as a DBA, and DBAs are the weirdest, like sort of like they don't do anything structurally, legally, or financially. It's just Dave Kellett as Small Fish Studios, which is what I was back then, you know? Right. And I think I filed something in a local newspaper, which is like this weird 1880s law type thing of like, you have to display your DBA being doing business as. So it's Dave Kellett doing business as Small Fish Studios. And then, I don't know, 5 years go by and my accountant is like, listen, your income is enough at this point where the smart move is, in my case, was to have a C Corp. And a C Corp is a pass-through tax. It's a structure in the U.S. that allows for pass-through taxation, which is great because you can take more write-offs than you could as an individual. And yet the profits seem to, I don't, listen, I'm not an accountant. I let my accountant deal with that. But there's also an LLC, which is, frankly, from my standpoint, more advantageous from a liability standpoint than a tax standpoint. It still is helpful from tax standpoint, but and then there's an S Corp, which is different again. But even before that, so between DBA and incorporating, the other thing you can do is just set up separate business accounts. You've got a separate deposit account with a separate checking, and you've got a separate little credit card, and all of your business transactions just go through that business account, banking account, and that credit card. That way, at the end of the year, you or your bookkeeper or your accountant, or again, just you, have all your cartooning costs separated out, right? And it's sort of a nice step on the way to incorporating, but you don't necessarily have to incorporate yet, you know?
Yeah.
And so when do you incorporate? That's a question for an accountant, because honestly, it depends on your local, your state, your local, and your federal tax burden. But that's not a question for Dave or Brad to answer. That's for an accountant to answer. But so remember that a corporation is set up for two primary reasons. One is to handle the cash flow and the taxation of that cash flow separate from you as an individual. It's an entity that exists separate from you. The other one is for liability reasons. The corporation is the thing that would get sued, not you, the individual cartoonist, or the corporation is the thing that would enter in contracts, not you, the individual. And so there's that. I could do a whole long pro tips on this, and maybe I should have one day, is just talk about all how I first set up payroll, how I first got my S Corp established, and this and that. But anyway, long story short is, to start, you don't need any of this. You just need to start making comics and making money from comics.
Yep. In the very beginning, you're going to be what's called a sole proprietor.
Sole proprietor. That's the phrase I was trying to remember. Good job, Grandpa.
Yeah. And you can do quite a bit as a sole proprietor. And there's actually advantages to that in terms of making quick decisions and being nimble and so forth.
Right.
You can do quite a bit as a sole proprietor. I would stay a sole proprietor as long as you can until you need to move up to that corporation. To that LLC. Dave has great advice in setting up a DBA, a doing business as name, and then setting up a separate bank account. But once you've done those things, you're in pretty good shape. You can relax. Dave, doesn't this person need to do a business plan? Every book you read, you got to do a business plan. You got to do. How come we're not advising this poor person to do a business plan?
So listen, if I'm going to open up a fruit stand, I need to buy a physical fruit stand, and then I need to buy at least that first batch of fruit so that I can start selling stuff, right? But I've only got $100 to my name. So I go to the bank and I say, listen, I need $5,000 to buy a fruit stand and my first batch of fruit. And they go, well, how are you going to prove that you can do what you say you're going to do? And you go, oh, here is my business plan that I've written up, showing cash flow, showing expected expenses, showing my liabilities, showing my income, showing all the things that a business would need to show for a third party to say, oh, I see, you know what you're doing. Here is a loan. For me, a business plan is really only needed if you're going to get a loan. And the short version is, don't get a loan to start comics. Here's what you need to start comics: a pen and a piece of paper. That's what you need to start comics.
Yes.
So don't get a business loan, and you do not need a business plan. That's not something for you. I will advise, because listen, I don't come from a business background. Everything I've learned has been the hard way along the way. Go to your local library. Literally just start reading books called like How to Start a Business. How to start a mom and pop. Look on that first. Don't look on how to start a multinational corporation. Just look on how to start, like Brad said, a sole proprietor, mom and pop type business. That usually means like local market that just runs a little thing, or, a guy that runs a plumbing corporation. Not a plumbing corporation, just a plumber is basically a sole proprietor most often. Knowing that you will eventually, 3, 5, 7, 10 years down the line, you're going to want to incorporate, mainly personally, I would say, for tax reasons and liability reasons. You don't want somebody to sue you and be able to take your house. You want them to sue you and take the company's assets, not your assets. So I personally like having liability of a corporation, but to start, it can be as simple as you with a pen and a piece of paper and something to scan it and put it on the internet, and bada bing, bada boom, you're quote unquote in business, right? It can be that simple.
Yeah. Yeah. And now that you're in business, I'm afraid we're going to have to go out of business, because we've been another hour talking comics over here. And it's time for me to say that you've been listening to Comic Lab, the show about making comics and making a living from comics.
Your hosts have been my friend Brad Geiger, the editor of webcomics.com, the note perfect Willie Nelson impersonator, and the creator of Evil Inc. at evilcomic.com.
And my close personal friend Dave Kellett, the co-director of the comics documentary Stripped, and the cartoonist of Sheldon at sheldoncomics.com and Drive at drivecomic.com.
And the Comic Lab theme song is used with permission from Andy Creighton at theworldrecord.net. And this episode was edited by the ever wonderful Matt Woodard of Woodsong Productions over at www.woodsong.media.
If you love Comic Lab, you can rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts and on Spotify, and you may hear your review featured on a future episode.
And don't forget to give us those kind reviews. The kind written reviews make such a difference. It helps other people find us, and we really appreciate it. And you might get them read on the show. And I will say Comic Lab is made possible by your support at patreon.com/Comic Lab. So I will go ahead and sing that like Willie Nelson. Patreon.com/Comic Lab.
Mama, don't let your readers grow up to be writers. Don't let them pick plot lines. Okay. Don't let them pick plot lines and drive all your arcs. Let them be doctors and lawyers and such. Mama, don't let your readers grow up to be writers, 'cause they'll never stay put on giving you input, even when you say not now.
You're a damn delight.